And if you haven't noticed that with kids, doing something for the likes is more important than their own genitals, you haven't been paying attention. Dr. Erica Anderson is a prominent 71-year-old clinical psychologist who is herself transgender and who now says, I think it's gone too far. The LA Times summarizes, she's come to believe that some children identifying as trans are falling under the influence of their peers and social media. If you attend a small dinner party of typically very liberal upper-income Angelenos, it is not uncommon to hear parents who each have a trans kid having a conversation about that. What are the odds of that happening in Youngstown, Ohio? If this spike in trans children is all natural, why is it regional? Either Ohio is shaming them or California is creating them.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Wasden Wednesday, January the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivational shorts, Bishop Robert Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and SEAL Team 6. All that and more when I get back.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Thank you. And now the military shorts.
You know, I think I said this one time, and it's something that's stuck in me that I'll never forget. My mom was very tough on me, very, very tough.
Yeah.
You know, in many ways. And I was 10 or 12 years old, and she had yelled at me for something, I don't know. So I go into the living room, and there's my Uncle Joe, merchant marine, hard guy, you know, drunk a lot all of his life, but really a hard guy. And I walk into the room, and I probably had a tear in my eye. He says, "What's the matter with you?" I said, "Oh, my mother again, and, you know, she's starting on me." He said, "Let me ask you a question. You got a dictionary in this house?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Go get it." Just like that. Dictionary. I go up, I bring the dictionary. He says, "Open it up." He said, "I want you to look for the word sympathy." He said, "See what it means, and don't ever look for it again." Just like that. And you know what? It hit home. Because when you blame somebody else, when you pass everything off on something else in your life, and you don't take responsibility, it may make you feel better for a minute. Hey, it's not my fault, but it doesn't do anything for you.
An A-10 pilot was in Afghanistan providing much-needed close air support to a group of special operations forces when all of a sudden his left instrument stack lit up like a Christmas tree. Enemy shooters, hidden within the crevices of a 12,000-foot rocky outcrop, had been showering him with bullets as he strafed them. Now, if his instrument panel was correct, he was in serious trouble. That's because his left engine was on fire, and as he struggled to gain altitude, he was surrounded by giant peaks that threatened to block his escape. Jettisoning his ordnance would have helped him gain altitude, but since the ground was covered with friendlies, that was out of the question. So as the crippled A-10 approached the ridgeline, he prepared to eject until he suddenly decided he might make it over. The jagged rocks now rising up in front of him, he pushed the jet to its limits and just barely managed to clear the ridge by 40 feet. He then flew an hour back to base. The next day, he flew the exact same jet on another mission.
He enlisted in the Navy just 4 days shy of his 18th birthday with the hopes of becoming a pilot, but because of his color blindness, was made a gunner. He was stationed on an aircraft carrier as a turret gunner for an Avenger aircraft before being reassigned as a gunner for torpedo bombers. His name was Paul Newman, and were it not for a bizarre twist of fate, he might not have survived the Second World War. It was the Battle of Okinawa, one of the most grueling and costly of the Pacific Theater, and Newman's crew was assigned to the aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill. An ear infection prevented Newman's pilot from flying, and so they remained in Hawaii while their squadron joined the aircraft carrier. On May 11, 1945, the Bunker Hill was struck by 2 Japanese kamikazes, killing over half the crew of 600, including everyone from Newman's squadron. Paul Newman once said he never got over the heartbreak of losing so many buddies or the survivors' guilt of being spared.
When a NATO fighter shot down a Russian Su-24, World War III looked like it was about to happen. Let me explain. The Turkish Air Force's warning radars picked up 2 unknown aircraft taking off from Syria. These aircraft turned out to be Russian Su-24 fencers, carrying out a mission close to the Turkish border. The Russians didn't warn Turkey about this, so they were seen as a threat. But even though they received 10 radio warnings from the Turkish Air Force, one Su-24 ignored the alerts and headed straight towards Turkish airspace. When the aircraft entered the airspace, there was still no response. A pair of F-16s were called and given permission to fire. They had no other option but to fire at the jet. The leading F-16 deployed an AIM-120 missile at the Russian jet. On impact, the Su-24 was destroyed and crashed near Turkmen Mountain. This incident resulted in the death of one Russian pilot, while the other miraculously survived. When Russian authorities heard about this, they made the decision to not buy any tomatoes from Turkey anymore.
He had just finished delivering the 7 a.m. mass on board the USS Oklahoma when the first wave of Japanese planes swooped into Pearl Harbor. The ship was moored on Battleship Row and within minutes was hit by 8 torpedoes, causing it to rapidly roll over. He was Navy Chaplain Father Aloysius Schmidt, and along with a dozen other men, he was trapped in a compartment with only a small porthole as means of escape. The porthole was so small that it required someone to push the men through, a job Father Schmidt insisted on doing. After all the men had gone through the tiny hatch, Father Schmidt heard a voice. "Over here," he yelled to the dazed sailor. Neck deep in water, Father Schmidt was able to save the final sailor, but succumbed to exhaustion and drowned before he could save himself. He was one of 429 sailors and Marines who perished aboard the Oklahoma. the Navy presented a special crucifix made from the teak wood and metal from the Oklahoma.
Now Tiger Tack is very tough to knock out because it weighed 72 tons. How thick the armor was, it was slanted, and no wonder we couldn't knock it out. But what we did, we knocked the tracks off of it and paralyzed it, and then we could go around to the back and knock it out from the rear. But they had a swivel 88 on there, too, so you had to be careful or you get knocked out, too, before you got to knock them out. So, but we were well trained in the United States to fight the war.
My dad's legacy in that life meant everything to him. My dad used to get a hold of me and said, Michael, you know this life is foolish. He said, you know that, right? Yeah, just me and him. He said this and that, and everybody's going to tell you this. You got to watch for everybody. So I don't care who it is. Watch for everybody. But outwardly, he wanted to be the most stand-up. He's dying with his boots on, and he did. 50 years, would never talk to them, never say a word. It just wasn't in his makeup. He couldn't do it. But the flip side of that, Chaz, now I leave this up for people to decide. My dad sacrificed our entire family, and he never understood that. He got mad at me one time when I said to him, Dad, do you realize you destroyed our lifestyle, destroyed this family? He would not take responsibility for it. I think it hurt him too much. He said, no, I was framed. If I wasn't framed, none of this would have happened. I said, Dad, you weren't framed because you were a doctor, a lawyer, or a priest. You were framed because you were a wise guy. But, you know, I mean, I understood where he was coming from. But look, this was his principle, and he kept it. The most powerful boss during my time was definitely Chin Gigante. Yeah. He had the grip on his family. And Fat Tony was capable. I don't want you to think he was just a puppet there, but he consulted with Chin on anything major. No question about it. And I respected Chin. I really did.
He was feared too.
He was feared. I mean, he was a real guy.
I mean, that's how they got the thing where you couldn't say his name. You had to go.
Had to go like this.
Yeah,
that's how he got his name.
Because if you said his name on tape, punishable by death.
You were in trouble. Absolutely.
And Chin didn't meet with everybody.
Chin didn't care who you were.
He didn't care who you were.
Didn't matter.
That's
you could have been the boss. You could have been. If he didn't want to meet you, he didn't meet you. End of story. Right. Never forget, I walked up and down Houston Street with him, and he was in his bathrobe, the whole thing, and we walked up and down, and we had a very lucid conversation about things. And, I don't have to repeat what he said. I'll tell you what he did do, which was a compliment to me, and it came out of nowhere. He said to me, Mike, if you ever have trouble where you are and you want to be part of my family, you're a captain in my family.
You got to be real careful to acquire, identify, and engage. This is where the muzzle thump would come in. Muzzle thump is where you take your rifle and you jam it into someone's chest to put them down and hurt them bad. A lot of dudes who don't understand military context don't realize a muzzle thump is meant to save someone's life so you can determine in adequate time and space whether you should take their life. That's the point. If it was a bad guy, don't muzzle thump, just shoot him. If it's a good person, don't shoot him and don't assault them. That's a good person. If you don't know and they're right up on you, hurt them really bad, really sudden, and don't compromise your ability to shoot them. So wham, muzzle thump. You take that muzzle and you crush it into their sternum or wherever else, not in the face because that's going to kill them. You jack them up or you just bulldog them over.
And that was the military shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the motivational shorts.
When you commit to a marriage, part of the commitment, and it's a covenant, part of the commitment is, well, you're going to go astray and I'm going to go astray, like seriously astray, but the best part of both of us and the best part of our union will still be waiting for us if we can return to it, right? And that's the promise of that covenant. And that's a great thing, because imagine it was the case in your life that all your relationships were conditional to the point where if you made a mistake of sufficient magnitude, the relationship would just cease. It's like, well, everyone would be lost, because at some point in your life, you're going to make a mistake that big.
Whenever you feel negative or unhappy about anything, you say, wait a minute, I'm responsible. I'm responsible for my life. I'm responsible for what happens. I can't change the past, so I'm not going to spend a second worrying about the past. I'm going to become so busy working on my future and my goals that I don't have time to think about the past.
Excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. Choice not chance, determines your destiny.
Villains and heroes actually have the exact same backstory. Both the villain story and the backstory of the hero are pain. The hero is almost always an orphan in some way. They are orphaned at the beginning of the movie. They have pain. The villain, if you'll watch the movie closely, screenwriters will put a scar on their face, a limp, some sort of speech impediment. What they're indicating is that this person has a painful backstory. So the difference between the villain and the hero is one thing. It's how they respond to pain. And the villain says, the world hurt me, I'm going to hurt it back. And the hero says, the world hurt me, I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else. It's just literally how you decide to react to pain that causes you to be the villain or turns you into the hero.
One evening, a gentleman came to our house and said, there is a Hindu family with 8 children, have not eaten for a long time. Do something for them. And I took rice and I went immediately. And there was this mother, those little ones' faces, shining eyes from sheer hunger. She took the rice from my hands. She divided it into 2 and she went out. When she came back, I asked her, where did you go? What did you do? And one answer she gave me, they are hungry also. She knew that the next door neighbor, a Muslim family, was hungry. What surprised me most, not that she gave the rice, but what surprised me most, that in her suffering, in her hunger, she knew that somebody else was hungry.
With my little granddaughter the other day, she's very, very playful, and she's a very nice little girl. She's very playful and very fun and funny, so she's a pleasure to be around. But she hasn't seen me for a while, and so she was poking me, getting me to chase her around and poking me, and she'd come up and give me a whack, And at one point, she whacked me too hard, and she knew it, and I said, that's not fun. That's not acceptable. And then she stopped. But she was playing with that edge, trying to find out where fun is and, how hard can I hit Grandpa? She doesn't bloody well know. She kind of knows, but she needs to know exactly. Well, I can't let her get away with it because then she's not fun to play with. She has to learn to come and give her grandpa a whack in exactly the way that elicits a playful response and that isn't annoying. And so, you might think, well, it's pretty harsh judgment to lay on a 5-year-old. It's like, no, it's not. I would like her to be the most fun kid to play with that she could be.
We're not on this stage just because of talent or ability. We're up here because of 4 a.m. We're up here because of 2-a-days or 5-a-days. We're up here because we had a dream and let nothing stand in our way. If anything tried to bring us down, we used it to make us stronger. We were never satisfied, never finished, will never be retired. My high school English teacher, Mr. Fisk, I actually paid attention one time in class. And he said, he had this beautiful quote, and it read, rest at the end, not in the middle. And I took that to heart. I believe there's time for resting at the end, but for me, that time is not now. Thank you for this tremendous honor and acknowledging my basketball career, but I'm far from done. My next dream is to be honored one day for inspiring the next generation of athletes to have a dream, sacrifice for it, and never, ever rest in the middle.
The Joker once said, smile because it confuses people. Smile because it's easier than explaining what is killing you inside. I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve in a world that's lost its way. They laugh at me because I'm different. I laugh at them because they're all the same. We stopped checking for monsters under our bed when we realized they were inside us. They need you right now. But when they don't, they'll cast you out like a leopard. As you know, madness is like gravity. All it takes is a little push. For my whole life, I didn't know if I even really existed. But I do. And people are starting to notice.
If you stay in bed, if you stay on the couch, if you stay in your comfort zone, if you only do what is easy, your life will be hard. But if you do what is hard, if you get up, if you grind, if you are relentless, if you work as hard as possible, when other people are slacking off, your life will be easy.
Picasso one day was in a market, And a woman saw him. She said, "Mr. Picasso, it's great to see you. I'm a huge fan." He said, "Nice to meet you." She said, "Mr. Picasso," she pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. "Mr. Picasso, can you do a little piece of art for me? Can you do a little drawing?" He said, "Absolutely." Did a beautiful drawing. She looked at it. She said, "Oh, Mr. Picasso, fantastic." She starts walking away. He goes, "Oh, my dear lady, that'll be $1 million." She said, "Mr. Picasso, $1 million. It took you 30 seconds to do that." He said, "My dear lady, it took me 30 years to do that in 30 seconds."
And that was the motivational source. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the 33 strategies of war.
Chapter 7. Transform your war into a crusade. Morale strategies. The secret to motivating people and maintaining their morale is to get them to think less about themselves and more about the group. Involve them in a cause, a crusade against a hated enemy. Make them see their survival as tied to the success of the army as a whole. In a group in which people have truly bonded, moods and emotions are so contagious that it becomes easy to infect your troops with enthusiasm. Lead from the front. Let your soldiers see you in the trenches, making sacrifices for the cause. That will fill them with a desire to emulate and please you. Make both rewards and punishments rare but meaningful. Remember, a motivated army can work wonders, making up for any lack of material resources. The art of man management. We humans are selfish by nature. Our first thoughts in any situation revolve around our own interests. How will this affect me? How will it help me? At the same time, by necessity, we try to disguise our selfishness, making our motives look altruistic or disinterested. Our inveterate selfishness and our ability to disguise it are problems for you as a leader. You may think that the people working for you are genuinely enthusiastic and concerned. That is what they say. That is what their actions suggest. Then slowly you see signs that this person or that is using his or her position in the group to advance purely personal interests. One day you wake up to find yourself leading an army of selfish, conniving individuals. That is when you start thinking about morale, about finding a way to motivate your troops and forge them into a group. Perhaps you try artfully to praise people, to offer them the possibility of reward, only to find you have spoiled them, strengthening their selfishness. Perhaps you try punishments and discipline, only to make them resentful and defensive. Perhaps you try to fire them up with speeches and group activities. But people are cynical nowadays. They will see right through you. The problem is not what you are doing, but the fact that it comes late. You have begun to think about morale only after it has become an issue, not before. That is your mistake. Learn from history's great motivators and military leaders. The way to get soldiers to work together and maintain morale is to make them feel part of a group that is fighting for a worthy cause. That distracts them from their own interest and satisfies their human need to feel part of something bigger than they are. The more they think of the group, the less they think of themselves. They soon begin to link their own success to the group's. Their own interests and the larger interests coincide. In this kind of army, people know that selfish behavior will disgrace them in the eyes of their companions. They become attuned to a kind of group conscience. Morale is contagious. Put people in a cohesive, animated group, and they naturally catch that spirit. If they rebel or revert to selfish behavior, they are easily isolated. You must establish this dynamic the minute you become the group's leader. It can only come from the top, that is, from you. The ability to create the right group dynamic, to maintain the collective spirit, is known in military language as man management. History's great generals, Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Napoleon, were all masters of the art, which for military men is more than simply important. In battle, it can be the deciding issue, a matter of life and death. In war, Napoleon once said, the moral is to the physical as 3 to 1. He meant that his troops' fighting spirit was crucial in the outcome of the battle. With motivated soldiers, he could beat an army 3 times the size of his own. To create the best group dynamic and prevent destructive morale problems, follow these 8 crucial steps culled from the writings and experiences of the masters of the art. It is important to follow as many of the steps as possible. None is less important than any other. Step 1. Unite your troops around a cause. Make them fight for an idea. Now more than ever, people have a hunger to believe in something. They feel an emptiness, which, left alone, they might try to fill with drugs or spiritual fads, but you can take advantage of it by channeling it into a cause you can convince them is worth fighting for. Bring people together around a cause, and you create a motivated force. The cause can be anything you wish, but you should represent it as progressive. It fits the times. It is on the side of the future, so it is destined to succeed. If necessary, you can give it a veneer of spirituality. It is best to have some kind of enemy to hate. An enemy can help a group to define itself in opposition. Ignore this step, and you are left with an army of mercenaries. You will deserve the fate that usually awaits such armies. Step 2. Keep their bellies full. People cannot stay motivated if their material needs go unmet. If they feel exploited in any way, their natural selfishness will come to the surface, and they will begin to peel off from the group. Use a cause, something abstract or spiritual, to bring them together, but meet their material needs. You do not have to spoil them by overpaying them. A paternalistic feeling that they are being taken care of, that you are thinking of their comfort, is more important. Attending to their physical needs will make it easier to ask more of them when the time comes. Step 3. Lead from the front. The enthusiasm with which people join a cause inevitably wanes. One thing that speeds up its loss and that produces discontent is the feeling that the leaders do not practice what they preach. Right from the beginning, your troops must see you leading from the front, sharing their dangers and sacrifices, taking the cause as seriously as they do. Instead of trying to push them from behind, make them run to keep up with you. Step 4. Concentrate their qi. There is a Chinese belief in an energy called qi, which dwells in all living things. All groups have their own level of qi, physical and psychological. A leader must understand this energy and know how to manipulate it. Idleness has a terrible effect on qi. When soldiers are not working, their spirits lower. Doubts creep in, and selfish interests take over. Similarly, being on the defensive, always waiting and reacting to what the enemy dishes out, will also lower qi. So keep your soldiers busy, acting for a purpose, moving in a direction. Do not make them wait for the next attack. Propelling them forward will excite them and make them hungry for battle. Aggressive action concentrates qi, and concentrated qi is full of latent force. Step 5. Play to their emotions. The best way to motivate people is not through reason, but through emotion. Humans, however, are naturally defensive, and if you begin with an appeal to their emotions, some histrionic harangue, they will see you as manipulative and will recoil. An emotional appeal needs a setup. Lower their defenses and make them bond as a group by putting on a show, entertaining them, telling a story. Now they have less control over their emotions, and you can approach them more directly, moving them easily from laughter to anger or hatred. Masters of man management have a sense of drama. They know when and how to hit their soldiers in the gut. Step 6. Mix harshness and kindness. The key to man management is a balance of punishment and reward. Too many rewards will spoil your soldiers and make them take you for granted. Too much punishment will destroy their morale. You need to hit the right balance. Make your kindness rare, and even an occasional warm comment or generous act will be powerfully meaningful. Anger and punishment should be equally rare. Instead, your harshness should take the form of setting very high standards that few can reach. Make your soldiers compete to please you. Make them struggle to see less harshness and more kindness. Step 7. Build the group myth. The armies with the highest morale are armies that have been tested in battle. Soldiers who have fought alongside one another through many campaigns forge a kind of group myth based on their past victories. Living up to the tradition and reputation of the group becomes a matter of pride. Anyone who lets it down feels ashamed. To generate this myth, you must lead your troops into as many campaigns as you can. It is wise to start out with easy battles that they can win, building up their confidence. Success alone will help bring the group together. Create symbols and slogans that fit the myth. Your soldiers will want to belong. Step 8. Be ruthless with grumblers. Allow grumblers and the chronically disaffected any leeway at all, and they will spread disquiet and even panic throughout the group. As fast as you can, you must isolate them and get rid of them. All groups contain a core of people who are more motivated and disciplined than the rest, your best soldiers. Recognize them, cultivate their goodwill, and set them up as examples.
And that was the beginning of Chapter 7, Transform Your War into a Crusade, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
I don't think we talk enough about the Holy Spirit, even though, of course, we mention and we honor and we worship the Holy Spirit, that we don't speak sufficiently of this third person of the Trinity. And there might be some truth to that. See, when you get in touch with the Holy Spirit, you're getting in touch with the love that connects the Father and the Son. You're getting in touch with the love that God is, and therefore with the very force that gave rise to the universe. So at the risk of sounding a little bit cosmic and grandiose, you're in touch with the most powerful force imaginable. You want power. I mean the real thing. Surrender your life over to the Holy Spirit. Say, Lord, look, it's not what I want. It's not my projects and plans. It's your projects and plans. You will find you will tap into this source of power to change things for good, change things for the better in your life, in your family, in your place of work. Surrender by a conscious act to the Spirit, and you unleash this great driving.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, freedom, in a political context, means freedom from government coercion. It does not mean freedom from the landlord or freedom from the employer or freedom from the laws of nature which do not provide men with automatic prosperity. It means freedom from the coercive power of the state and nothing else. Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. So Robert Reich. Robert Reich is one of the guys that's down for the struggle, okay, also known as dedicated. That's one of the things, in order to be a Marxist, Marx said you have to be dedicated. That means you cannot swerve, you cannot admit error or anything else. You have to be hammering this day after day after day after day. Never admit that you're wrong or that Marxism is wrong or anything like that. You never criticize Marxism. That's dedicated. So Robert Reich is one of the dedicateds. And as such, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. He's a harder person to defeat than the useful idiots. But following his account on Instagram or other places will give you an excellent place to start in terms of defeating the useful idiots, because useful idiots will look to Reich and others for their talking points. Okay, so today's talking point du jour, let's say, is from Robert Reich on Instagram, and he's at RB Reich, R-E-I-C-H. Let's get one thing straight, : if we allow a former president to completely avoid accountability for inciting an insurrection against the U.S. government, we will be inviting it to happen all over again. So, again, this is a thing where you can ask, what is he saying? But also you need to remember to ask yourself the question, what is he doing? And one of the things that he's doing, obviously, here is trying to intimidate you. This is a post that's not necessarily geared as much to his followers, although his followers could use this as a talking point, but I think it's geared more towards Republicans, conservatives, people like me. So, but the useful thing is to look at this, read it, ask what he's doing, and then ask yourself, if I go to work and tomorrow one of the useful idiots comes up to me with this talking point, a Robert Reich talking point, how should I respond? Okay, that's what you can do with all of these talking points, and whether it's like I've said over and over again, social media is an excellent place to practice. So you can, because with this, you can either do it in your own mind, you could even respond to him. So either way. So again, Robert Reich, down for the struggle, and he is an excellent source of practice. He's going to be the guy that's harder to defeat, but the useful idiots are going to use what he says as talking points, so you can be prepared for them. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of MSNBC.
Circumstances too. That's why this technique is also often used to swat. It's called swatting elected representatives.
It's on Maine.
Frankly, of both parties, actually, it's happened. And sometimes then when the law enforcement shows up at the house, really bad things can happen because they come tearing in. We've also seen this, and we've seen white supremacist groups advocating and training for this, swatting synagogues during service, saying there's a bomb that's been planted, in the synagogue, knowing that means law enforcement is going to descend upon that synagogue during the service, disrupt the service, throw people into panic. So in each one of these situations, it's intended to chill and intimidate, whether it's election officials like secretaries of state, state legislators, congressional legislators, or just, human beings in America practicing their faith. This is an alarming and growing, illegal conduct that really presents a threat of actual violence.
Right. Tim, it is alarming, and yet we all saw it coming. Attorney General Merrick Garland talked about the growing threats against public servants last fall. I want to play you some of that and talk about it on the other side.
We have had an astounding number of threats against public servants over the last several years. I think that when career public servants in the Justice Department and in election workers and airline crews, when they are singled out, this can lead to threats of violence and actual violence. We have the actual example of an attack on an FBI office by somebody who was incensed by political rhetoric.
So this whole thing on MSNBC is called, by the way, Deadline White House. And first, I want to preface what I'm going to say is normally I don't play things from MSNBC. All last year before that, I didn't. I was always playing things from Stuart Varney or Sean Hannity or other ostensibly right-wing media sources. And I left MSNBC, CNN, and whatnot out of the loop. And I did it because I get tired of hearing Sean Hannity say, oh, here, listen to this CNN clip. Listen to this MSNBC clip. And what he's doing is giving free advertising to CNN and MSNBC. So that's why I decided I didn't want to, as little as possible, am I going to play the clips. but it occurred to me recently that it just makes my critiques complicated. It makes it very difficult for me to make myself understood. Because I listen to my own podcast, and it's very awkward the way I have to explain it if I've got to go through Sean Hannity or whatnot. So that's why I decided from now on I'm going to spend more time playing clips from MSNBC, CNN, and perhaps others. And the purpose is going to be so that you know what the tricks are. So that's the whole idea here. These people are playing tricks on you. It's supposed to be a news agency, and that's one of the tricks. That's supposed to put you in the mindset that this is serious, that what they're talking about is serious. The second trick that they're doing here is tone of voice. They say things in a very serious tone of voice. But the third trick is, and the main trick is arbitrary claims. I first learned about arbitrary claims from Ayn Rand. She talked about arbitrary claims. An arbitrary claim is a claim that has no evidentiary support. They provide no evidence that this particular thing they're talking about exists, has existed, or ever will exist. And that's what you have happening in this little clip here, is they're talking about swatting. Who? Who got swatted? By whom? No answer. You like to use the phrase, we know. We know, we know, we know, we know. It's all designed to intimidate you. This is a news program, or ostensibly a news program. They're all talking in a serious tone of voice. So when they say, we know, we know, we know, what they're really doing is demanding that you fall into line and comply. That if they tell you that we know, damn it, we know, and you better not argue about it. So, we know that white supremacists have done this, that, or the other thing. Again, they don't know any such thing because they haven't produced any evidence that any of these white supremacist apparent actions have ever occurred. Okay? So it's all arbitrary. So when you go to work and somebody comes to you and starts spewing this garbage, hey, well, we know white supremacists have things. No, you don't. All you have to do is contradict them. Because the useful idiots, they're getting their information from CNN or MSNBC or The View, the Nazis on The View. And none of these folks are giving details as to where they got this information, why they consider their sources credible. No. What it's a fallacy called take my word for it. And we don't have to. I've talked about this before. It's optional. We take people's word for certain things. If I ask you to go check the weather, what's the weather doing? Is it raining outside? And you come back and tell me, well, yeah, it's raining. I take your word for it. Why? Convenience. Okay? But I don't have to. I could also go out and check. Right? Same thing goes here. They're demanding we take their word for it, take their word for it, take their word for it. Why? Because they're MSNBC, they're so-called journalists. Maybe even they have a master's degree in communication from Columbia. It's all intimidation. And I don't have to be intimidated. Neither do you. So remember, if you hear any of this garbage at work or anywhere else, if we're coming out of church or at the soccer field, all you have to do is when they say, well, we know that there's white supremacists doing this, that, or the thing, you say, no, you don't. And look at their face. And their mouth is going to be hanging open. And then, again, collect your victory and move on. So you say, no, they don't. And then you say, have a nice day. I got to go, and walk away. Because if you stand there and wait long enough, they'll come up with a response. And then you're sucked back into the conversation. The whole point here, winning, is simply creating a tie. By blocking them, thwarting them, that's all you have to do. You don't have to convince them you're right. In order to win, all you have to do is stop them. Okay? So, and this is a perfect way to do it. Contradiction. Oh, we know this. No, you don't. Well, Merrick Garland said that. No, he didn't. Just that easy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, SEAL Team 6.
17. Healing. I drove 268 miles to see my father at the hospital in Savannah, but appearances would be deceiving.
He was awake, joking with my sisters. The surgical doctor said, "Your father is going to be okay. He's in recovery." So that night I left him to prepare to take final exams at Life University. Several hours later, after I'd returned home, my youngest sister, Sue Ann, called to tell me that our father had had a heart attack. An hour later, around midnight, my cousin Greg told me Dad had passed away. Nobody saw it coming. I tried to take my exams anyway. During the first final exam, Dr. Marnie Capes told me, "Howard, you need to get up and walk out of here right now." No, I can do it. I can do it. I found out I wasn't as tough as I thought I was. My head was not in it. After I had become a SEAL, I didn't worry about Dad kicking the crap out of me anymore. Our relationship had improved. After Somalia, I told him I loved him for the first time. Then I told him every time I saw him after that. We hugged. The passage of time had mellowed him, too. During a family reunion shortly before his death, he told me how he approved of my new wife, Debbie. "She's a keeper. Don't mess up." He loved her. Regarding my new profession, he said, "When you open up your clinic, I'll be one of your first patients." Coming from a man who wouldn't go to a doctor unless he was dying, which was part of his undoing, his confidence in my future skills as a chiropractor meant a lot to me. I had received the acceptance, respect, and approval from my father that I'd always longed for. My mother told me that later in life Dad was disappointed that he and I didn't have a better relationship. I didn't have the heart to tell her that when I was home, he had always been a dictator. He didn't have conversations with me, didn't build a relationship. I didn't cry as much about his death as I had about Uncle Carol's. As a kid, I could ask Uncle Carol questions like, "Is it normal for me to wake up every morning with a hard pee-pee? Is there something wrong with me?" My uncle laughed. "No, that's normal, son." Still, my dad raised me the only way he knew how, and I was sad when he died. One day, about 9 months later, Blake asked out of the blue, "Would you like to meet him?" "Meet who?" I asked. "Your real dad." My biological father could have walked past me in the grocery store and I wouldn't have known who he was. "Yeah, Blake, I think I would." We did a people search and found him. Then I made the phone call. At Christmas, I went to see Ben Wilbanks, my biological father. Ben said that my mother had taken us kids and run off to Georgia with Leon. In my mind, Ben's story kind of explains the quick move from Florida to Georgia and the quick adoption. I'm inclined to believe him due to conflicting stories I got from my mother and sisters. Ben said he had spent years looking for me and could never find me. He turned out to be one of the nicest and most loving men I'd ever met. When he hugged me, I knew that I was really being hugged. Seeing Ben Wilbanks seemed to explain where I got my affectionate side, my capability for compassion and emotion. Ben had served in the Army as a military policeman and worked most of his career as a truck driver, which is what he still does. Blake and I continue to maintain a relationship with my biological father, Blake's grandfather. Whatever happened between my mother and Ben, she still hasn't forgiven him, nor forgotten. For my part, I refuse to hold decisions made in their youth against either of them because I wouldn't want to be held in contempt for all the decisions made by me in my youth. When I was getting ready to graduate from clinic, I received a message from Captain Bailey. He'd seen a magazine article about me in his chiropractor's office and sent an email congratulating me, asking if I remembered him from Bud's. It was a no-brainer remembering my commanding officer at Bud's. I could be on my deathbed and still remember him securing us from Hell Week. I graduated with honors as a doctor of chiropractic on September 24th, 2009. I have always been a show-me person and resisted going to a chiropractor for a long time, but chemicals couldn't fix my structural problem. The chemicals only hid my pain. A general practitioner can't do everything for a patient, and a chiropractor can't do everything. Working as a team, as I learned my whole life, we become more effective. Local doctors refer patients to me, and I refer patients to them. The patients benefit the most. When I first started seeing patients is when I knew I'd made the right decision. They trust me. I figure out what's wrong with them. I help them feel better, and they love me for it. I am now focused on my new career. Construction of my new clinic, Absolute Precision Chiropractic, was completed in April 2010. From the day I opened the doors, I have been blessed with busy days treating members of the local and surrounding communities. One of my patients, a 13-year-old boy, had been suffering from chronic headaches for 4 years. It turned out he experienced a bad car accident when he was little and lost the curve in his neck. He went from nearly 12 headaches a month on frequent medication to 1 or 2 headaches in the first 10 weeks I saw him. Success stories like this let me know I made the right decision. I truly feel that this is the path God intended for me when he spared my life in Somalia. Another affirmation for me occurred when I treated a young lady who had brachial palsy. Her arm hadn't formed correctly, and she had a lot of nerve damage. She was barely able to move her right arm. I had been helping her with electrical stimulation, adjusting her, and administering other chiropractic techniques. She laterally moved her arm 42 degrees for the first time in her life. Then she flexed her arm forward toward me 45 degrees for the first time. My assistant cried. The 15-year-old girl cried from her exertion and success. Her father cried. I stepped out of the room and cried. I had to walk around a little until I could hold back the tears. I grabbed a tissue and wiped my eyes. Then I returned to my patient as if everything were okay and said, "All right, here's your exercise for next week." Seeing her move that arm after hard work on both our parts fulfilled me. Helping patients like her helps lessen the guilt that still makes me wonder why I'm still alive when better men than me, like Dan Bush, are not. I understand better why God spared me. He really did have a purpose for me after my life as a SEAL. Even though Blake is in his 20s now, whenever he visits, I give him a goodnight hug. I give the same affection to my stepdaughter, Erin, whom I consider my own daughter. I give my wife, Debbie, a hug or a kiss every time I leave or return to the house. Debbie and I are so affectionate that friends tell us, "Get a room." Years ago, I had questioned why my life had been spared. Today, I am thankful that God spared my life, and equally thankful for the path that was laid before me. I once again have a positive mind, body, and spirit. Professionally and personally, life is good again.
And that was chapter 17, Healing. Next week is the final chapter from SEAL Team 6 by Howard Wasden. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.